So let's get the program rolling. I've been asked to introduce our first speaker. He was also at this roundtable this summer on life sciences and has returned from a global role to take on a leadership role with the government of Ontario. Bill Charnetski is the first Chief Innovation Strategist for the government of Ontario. He has a track record of leading transformational change, developing organization, leading people to realize their potential, fostering internal and external partnership and collaboration, and delivering results. Pour plus de 10 ans, il a travaillé à intégrer des solutions de santé au Canada et à travers le monde. His last posting was in the UK when he worked for the pharmaceutical industry. In his role, he's been asked to look at building up what Shannon was talking about, this economic driver that can be harnessed out of the development of small, medium-sized companies in the health sector in Ontario. And if he succeeds, the conversation that we will be having in years to come will be very different when we talk about health. Without further ado, Bill.
Kim, Shannon, thanks very much. I love when they read the short bios. That makes me very happy. I was talking to Tim beforehand in the category of things that might make you feel a bit old. I was on the original board of Canada 2020 those 10 years ago, and one of the principal things on my mind at that time was the critical need to leverage our investment in healthcare in this country, at the time $150 billion in the aggregate across the country, as an economic driver. So to get past that point where healthcare was seen as just a cost center, right? Just a cost of delivering goods and services to the citizenry, and see it as an opportunity, to use the phrases that they chose, for economic development in the country. And Tim thought that was a pretty good idea. I thought Canada 2020 had a great opportunity in front of it as a progressive think tank, a leading progressive think tank in this country. And it's fascinating because that is literally the work I'm doing in this role, and also tells you how relatively unsuccessful we were a decade ago. And you know, we were unsuccessful because we got lots of people excited about this very important topic. And to be brutally honest about it, the conversation stopped at the Ministry of Health, Ministries of Health, all of them, because they couldn't really get their heads around the idea that maybe where healthcare is arguably the fastest growing job and wealth creator of the 21st century, and we make massive state investments in that fast growing industrial sector, that perhaps it could be more than just the thing that shows up on your newspaper pages or online around the time of any provincial or federal budget. Either we spend too much on healthcare or not enough on healthcare, or whatever it is. But the conversation isn't about what it is about in pretty much every other jurisdiction around the world, namely, what an amazing opportunity to get economic development in a fast growth and high growth industry in which you have competitive advantage and full government support for the end user. So, look, I guess I'm kind of glad we weren't successful 10 years ago, because if we were, then I wouldn't have this job, and I love this job. I really love this job. And you know, as a bit of an aside, when I'm in a room full of officials, particularly Ministry of Health officials, it feels like, in Ontario, and I am at the 14-month mark, and I say how much I love my job, I actually now pause for laughter. I don't know what that says about whom, but anyway. Look, thanks very much, Tim, and everyone for having me here. Thanks, Shannon and Kim, for the intro. We're going to cover a few things here because we are at the one-year mark of what I think, and more importantly, what a lot of people think is a pretty incredible piece of work. It's important. It's right in that sweet spot of social enterprise, namely delivering an incredibly important public good and service, while at the same time applying the best that the private sector has to offer. So to be very clear right out of the gate, I'm not talking about private sector delivery of healthcare, so no one run for the exits thinking that there's going to be a speech about that. It isn't. It's actually almost mutually exclusive to that. In fact, I would suggest it is. We're talking about what you can do to build a strong, vibrant health technology ecosystem in this industrial sector. So that's the conversation. You know, I'm a year in. As I said, I love the job, and I've already seen how the discussion has changed and how we're having impact, we being the broad we, everybody in the health technology ecosystem is talking about health and innovation in Ontario and frankly across the country. We're already seeing clinicians and health service providers who I think have a better understanding of how to practically use new technologies to improve their standards of care, the way they deliver health care to people. We're increasingly seeing those amazing innovators and entrepreneurs in Ontario and across the country better understand the health system priorities and how to match their incredible ideas, their innovation, ideation, right? A word I didn't even know a year and a half ago. How to match their ideation with, in fact, the priorities of the healthcare system so that at the end of the day, ideas, innovation get commercialized. And really what probably should be called is Ontario's Chief Health Commercialization Strategist, because that's what we're talking about. It's the products, it's the technologies, the processes, the innovation that's knocking on the door of the healthcare system that isn't getting in. But there are also increasingly better funding, mentoring, and support opportunities for those innovators and entrepreneurs who are trying to get into that healthcare system. And there's just no shortage of examples of how powerful it is. But you know, you can really see firsthand from this role and people who work with us about how these new ideas are taking hold in the healthcare system. You know, Baycrest and the Ontario Brain Institute now have new opportunities for clinicians to actually partner with emerging startups to test, evaluate, and adopt new health technologies in that area. And in fact, for those of you who are interested, Baycrest has just announced a new innovation program to improve outcomes for people for seniors with severe dementia. Okay, so we're going to talk about 5 things quickly today. We're going to talk about what it feels like to be 1 year old. Not many 1-year-olds can talk about what they feel like when they're 1 year old, but I'm going to do that. We're going to talk about the innovation imperative, and Tim asked me to spend a little bit of time on why are we even here? Like, we'll figure out we'll talk about what we're doing, but why do we actually create this in the first place? Then we're going to take a look at where we've come, talk about purpose and priorities, where we've come in the first year, and then where we're going in 2017 and beyond. And I'm going to finish with maybe the one message that you can take away from this if you take nothing else away from this, and that's that I really think we're on the right track together, and I'm going to flesh that out for you at the end. So I'm a bouncing baby 1-year-old, right? This actually is a child of someone on our team, and we're just so proud of the fact that they figured out how to get Ochus on his little baby bib there. So that's the only reason for showing that picture. But it is a year old, and as I've said, we can see the differences already. Gosh, the work is far from done. But different conversations are happening, as Shannon and Kim said. Different conversations are happening, things are advancing, and more to the point, and more importantly, it's not what I feel, it is what I feel, but more importantly, it's what others are telling me. And I've spent, just by coincidence, the last 2 weeks in a number of different places where people have literally said that as they've heard me talk about where we're at in the 1-year mark. The innovation imperative, that's why we exist. This could be an entire day's conference on its own. And there are people more articulate than I am who you might have heard speak about it. Minister Baines, for example, has a terrific dissertation on why investment innovation matters in Canada in 2016 and going forward. From where we sit, the innovation imperative has 2 planks, if you will, that relate to why this office was created. So I'm going to give you the punchline first. This office was created for the first time in Canada, we are going to, in Ontario, leverage our investment in healthcare as an economic driver. So that's why it exists. We have a $52 billion end user, single payer, owned and operated by a single person, in air quotes, the government, sitting right here. Widely respected, not perfect, but widely respected. So that's your end user. Around it is an emerging health technology ecosystem. No shortage of startups in Ontario. I think you make the same comment around the country. No shortage of startups, no shortage of ideation. What we don't do is scale those companies up. So we have lots of small and medium-sized enterprises, between 800 and 1,200, depending on who's counting, and the criteria. But they're succeeding not because of this $52 billion end user. They're succeeding in spite of it. In spite of it. So think about that. You're this close to vertical integration in one of the fastest growing industrial sectors in the world. And yet the companies, the supply chain, to use that term a bit loosely, are succeeding in spite of the fact that the end user is right there. And they're amazing stories. I was in London, Ontario earlier this week. A bit embarrassed to say that I hadn't really heard much about Trudel Medical. Trudel Medical is a family-owned business, 500 employees, 240 of them in London. Great facility, terrific leadership team, family-owned, very successful. And when you sit with them, I mean, you're impressed by all of it. You're impressed by the technology. Actually, they supplied AstraZeneca. I think they currently supply AstraZeneca, but they also used to. Their business is they manufacture respiratory agent delivery devices. So think of those, puffers, to use that doesn't do justice to what they do, but think of that delivery device. So they manufacture those. Great presentation. Everybody's super excited about what they're doing. They have done all of this, sell around the world, do not have any sales in Canada, let alone in Ontario. None. That's how impenetrable the healthcare system is. That's just one example of the challenge and the opportunity. So that's why the office exists, to grow the health technology ecosystem. I see people from Medtronic in the room, like a multinational enterprise, highly, highly respected, excellent at what they do. Absolutely no reason why the next Medtronic or Baxter, whatever, couldn't come out of Ontario, couldn't come out of the GTA, the Hamilton area, London, Ottawa. No reason, right? So that's why we exist. Okay, so that's the punchline. How did we get here? Why is it really that important? The first plank of the innovation imperative is the economic development one. I've alluded to this already. The Ontario government had the vision recently to think, we're not going to win in the low-cost industries anymore as much as we used to. Manufacturing, natural resource extraction, they will always be important parts of the Ontario economy, but they're never going to be as dominant as they once were. There are countries and societies around the world who just have different value sets and are going to pay their people and provide remuneration that is just significantly less than what we would accept. You cannot compete generally on that basis. So you play to your strengths and you look for high growth areas. The knowledge-based economy is one of them for us. So we are now going to compete and win in the knowledge-based economy because we have to. If you are going to compete and win, and there will be winners and losers, you need to invest in innovation. So, bad news is, change is afoot. A little bit tougher news is the following. This speech is, I'm not the only one in the world giving this speech, right? Every jurisdiction around the world, give or take, to some extent is having this conversation. And when I was at AstraZeneca Global Head Office, I sat on the other side of the table from not just team US or whatever state might be in front of us, not just team, hearing the French come forward, or the Dutch, or the Germans, or people in the UK itself, and not even just the BRICS countries anymore, who can marshal whatever forces are required to do whatever it is they want to do. That's their political system. But increasingly it's Algeria, it's Vietnam, it's countries who are growing their own industries and are lining up to come forward and saying, come to us. And so that's how difficult the environment is to compete in. So Canada has to get past the place where it's just going to compete, do the tick the box exercise, that it's going to compete in these new industries, the fast growth industries of the 21st century. You better compete to win, because if you don't, you're going to lose. That's how it works. So my remit is Ontario, so how do we do that? Well, you invest in innovation, right? So the bad news is we got to change. The tougher news is it's highly competitive. The really good news is McKinsey, BCG, everybody will tell you, just a second, health gets in the way of delivering a health speech. They're going to tell you that if you're going to build a cluster, if you're going to go after this, you go after high growth industries in which you have competitive advantage. That's the great news for us. We have that in health. In health. End user, supply chain, emerging health ecosystem, already successful, great ideas. We don't have to make the ideas up. People are telling us they add value to the system, improve patient outcomes. All we need to do is put these two together. That's all. That's all, in air quotes. So So look, we're going to do that. And you know how much, you know, a little fun fact to show how it can really make a difference? 40 years ago, Silicon Valley didn't exist. If you were going to Boston, you were going there because you loved sports or maybe American history, or one of your kids was at one of those great world-leading educational institutions in Boston. Detroit and Cleveland were the 5th and 7th largest cities in the US. Think about that. Think about how different that is from where we are now. Silicon Valley, Boston, without question the global leaders in health technology and broader, more broadly the innovation economy. You know how tough Detroit has it. Cleveland has some success, in particularly places like the Cleveland Clinic, but these are not, that is a complete role reversal, not due entirely to investment or lack thereof in innovation, but principally, the auto industry in North America did not keep up. So it can really, really have an impact. If you get it right and you win, it can be huge. That's the economic development perspective. The other plank of this imperative is healthcare sustainability. So I know you're going to hear from Simon Kennedy later. So again, there's people, they're delivery agents who can speak probably more eloquently than I can about this, but let's pretend that the current healthcare system is sustainable. Let's pretend it is for the case of the discussion. It will not be if we don't find a way to do more with at least the same, if not less. You know, if you're going to grow that if you have economic growth such that the denominator grows and you continue to put money in healthcare, that's one, you know, that obviously is better than not being able to do that. I don't think we're going to have that luxury in Canada, right? So we need to figure out how to do more with at least the same in healthcare. And one of the great things, because of these two parts that I've described with this innovation imperative, is the job I am doing now is fundamentally easier than it was 10 years ago when I was talking to Tim and others around the country with colleagues from different industries, pharma, devices, et cetera, academia, research, everyone, about how to leverage this investment as an economic driver. It's not pushing a rope anymore. Everybody's agreed on the destination. Really, now we're just talking about how we get there. Here's another fun slide that could be the subject of an entire talk. It's an IBM slide, so it's all, you know, all credit to them. But I think it's pretty powerful stuff as we seek to establish this imperative, like the why it's important to have this work. So remember, we've talked about the economic development imperative and the healthcare sustainability imperative. This slide starts from the premise that every industrial system evolves to reflect the various external stimuli. So what the government is, what the culture is, what the value system is, what the economy is like. So whether it's retail or natural resource or transportation or financial, a system evolves. And then, as you probably also know, no system is perfect. Every system is inherently flawed with inefficiencies. So this chart says, you know, IBM's premises are entering a fundamentally different industrial environment, characterized as much as anything by a system of systems. So now, because of technology and the ability to have, it's not just Internet of Things, you hear more and more about incredible advances in technology like blockchain technology, where you will just have an ability to communicate in ways we can't even imagine. So they're saying, look, this will have an incredible impact on our industrial sectors as it becomes a system of systems. So what does this do? So the bubbles are all at different industrial sectors. The vertical axis looks at the proportion or the improvement potential if you were to get at inefficiencies. So how much could you actually improve an existing inefficiency? The horizontal axis says what percentage of that is that inefficiency of the total economic value. So vertical axis is can you actually correct the inefficiencies? Horizontal axis is how big is that inefficiency as a proportion of the total economic value. So the top right-hand corner shows places where you can actually get at the inefficiency, and correcting that inefficiency will have a big impact on the economic value of that industrial sector. And the big red circle, healthcare. This is a global analysis, right? Goes back to that point that it is arguably the fastest growing job and wealth creator globally as an industrial sector. So I don't know, it's 5.2 trillion or 4.8 or that's not really the point. The point is look at it relative to the other industrial sectors. There's massive opportunity in this industrial sector. It really is time to look at this as an opportunity rather than a cost. So the Government of Ontario has the vision to get at this. They create the Ontario Health Innovation Council, really impressive council, multidisciplinary, has people from finance, healthcare delivery, tech, multinationals, as well as local. And the council issues recommendations, there's 6 of them, but their first one is to create an office of the Ontario Health Innovation Strategist, whose day job is to look at this issue. And that's me. And so if there's somebody who is a representative of the council in the room, I always make the requisite joke that I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for you. I don't think there is anybody here, but if I don't see you in the lights, I apologize. Anyway, so they create the office. I'm 1 year old, as I said, as of September 21, and we said a couple things right out of the gate, like we're going to try and run this office more like a business than an arm of the health ministry. That's why I was hired. I was expressly told not to get sucked into the bowels of Hepburn Block in Toronto. Keep up above the fray. Lots of people around to deliver health care. Your job is to see how the puzzle pieces fit together, to find out how to introduce innovation into the conversation. I can have a whole discussion about how I do this job that I think is really important for those private sector people looking to enter the public sector. But I think being well trained by various people over the years, including my mother, the idea is you come into the public sector executive table not with sharp elbows thinking you're this super smart private sector guy who's going to change the world in 6 months. You don't do that. What you do is you articulate for people what you're trying to do, you tell them what your purpose is, and you work with them to find ways that your remit, the work that you're doing, can help them do their jobs. And that was pretty smart on my part, but more to the point, the right way to do business, and really well received by colleagues. And I'll tell you that I'm super, super grateful to colleagues around that Ministry of Health executive table for being open to me and for being willing to engage in this whole topic. Because if it's true collaboration, third word in that purpose statement we're going to talk about, it takes 2, right? And everywhere I go, I make that point that I'm lucky to be working with these people. They are incredibly hardworking, very smart. I don't even know how they keep the balls in the air as they do. And it's really important that be, from our perspective, and I think from theirs too now, that be a strong working relationship, and I think we've done that. So, because we have a small band of merry warriors, all kitted out, there's going to be about 12 of us. That's not going to change the world unless we enlist the help of others. So our purpose statement, it's to drive collaboration. That word collaboration is incredibly important across the healthcare system to accelerate the adoption and diffusion of new innovative health technologies and processes with 3 objectives: to improve patient outcomes, so that's in accordance with the province's health strategy, patients first. Add value to the system, that's cost effectiveness. In a room full of entrepreneurs, I will say, look, you have to understand that just because you think it's super cool, it might be super cool, but it has to be cost effective to be introduced into the healthcare system. There are opportunity costs to investments in health. There are everywhere, but certainly in health. But the third objective is to create jobs in the province of Ontario, and that's the one that we focus on unapologetically. It's clear after a year in, there's no shortage of super smart, passionate, hardworking people working on health and innovation in Ontario as there are across the country. We focus on how to get those people to work better together to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. 2 awesome cliches in 5 seconds, both true. So our job is to get everyone to collaborate amongst health service providers, with innovators and entrepreneurs, all of them with the ministry with them. It's really to drive a behavioral change throughout the system. I love the job. It's really interesting. None of them report to me, so it takes a lot of effort to lead without authority. So we're going to talk about our priorities as we look at what we've done to date, but we think of it this way. So at the top of the triangle sits the purpose, not surprisingly. There are really 2 principal priorities. One is to optimize the pathways to the adoption diffusion of innovation in the healthcare system. So $52 billion business, it should be a pull for innovation. This is one area where the profit motive makes it easier to have this happen. If you're motivated by growing the revenue line and or reducing the costs, but basically increasing profit, you will invest in innovation, even if it costs more upfront, because you're going to know that over time, we're going to make more money out of it, right? So, again, I'm not talking about introducing the profit motive into our healthcare system. However, we need to find the ways to create that pull that a $52 billion business should pull, even a social enterprise, so that innovation comes into the system faster and more broadly. So the pathways is the first priority. That's overcoming those barriers and hurdles to doing that. Gets you quickly to the second priority, procurement. Right now in Ontario Health, we basically have cost-based procurement. There are exceptions. But generally, because money is so tight, the instructions to the shared service organization, so those are the procurement bodies in the Ontario healthcare system, are to just get the best price you can. That's in many ways the antithesis to innovation. So we are driving towards a value-based procurement model in Ontario. It's already the subject of an EU directive. This is not, I'm not cutting edge, right? Nothing I'm saying is novel. It's how do we bring it into Ontario? So the drive to value-based procurement, where procurement is a pull, again, common theme, pull of innovation. Both of those things will be dependent on having a demand-driven healthcare system when it comes to bringing innovation in, and we're going to talk about that as a fundamental tenet of our work now, but also going forward. So under those two principal priorities, we focused on three areas. Remember I said we're going to run it like a business? We're going to judge ourselves by the impact we have. If you're going to do that, you have to have fewer priorities rather than more because, again, another cliche, if everything's a priority, nothing is. So we focused on three areas. One is home and community care. We call it better care closer to home. That's the idea that the number one priority of health systems around the world with an aging population. You got to get health care to get to the people rather than making people continually come into bricks and mortars and big institutions wherever they may be located. We don't deliver that. Our lens on it, though, is how do you use digital, mobile, virtual technologies to make that happen. The second of those three focus areas is digital health. So we'll talk more about that. The principle, though, is people should have control of their own personal health information, and there should be interconnectivity across the system so their circles of care are able to make better, more informed healthcare decisions faster, and the system is able to provide healthcare more effectively and efficiently. The third purpose is immensely powerful if we, the third priority in that line is immensely powerful if we can get to it, and that's to improve the health of our Indigenous people, particularly those who live on the reserves. Those outcomes are woeful. We'll talk about that in a second. But the potential for changing the way they do things in delivering health care to the reserves and frankly, the economic opportunity in doing so is immense. So I told you there were 6 recommendations from the OHIC Council. And in the first year, I'm really pleased to report that we've delivered fully on 3 of them and have made immense progress on the other 3. We created this office. We launched a health technologies fund, which I'm going to talk about in a second. We've recruited 3 of our first innovation brokers. So think field employees who have the insight to start putting people together out in the field. We'll talk about those in a minute. And the other 3 we've made great progress on. We're starting this move to the value-based procurement model. We've already started real conversations and actions on how to create incentives and remove barriers to innovation. And as I already started to talk about, we've started to optimize the pathways to the adoption and diffusion of innovation. I've met with over 1,000 people in the first year. 1,000 people, not all one-on-one, a lot of them one-on-one. Because we decided early on that to continue the momentum of the council and the fact that the province, council recommendations and the fact that the province accepted them all, it was really important to get out there and show people what we were about. And frankly, that I and we weren't like the other health officials, right? We're trying to do things differently. We're agents of change, right? So it was very important for us to do that. Also, if collaboration is so important that it's the third word of your purpose statement. I think, as you all know, you don't get collaboration in any aspect of life, personal or professional, if you don't have relationships of trust. And you don't get trust without true relationships. And you don't get true relationships if you don't get out and meet people and engage with people. That takes work. So that was very purposeful in our first year, that I spent an awful lot of time at events like this and smaller events and one-on-one meetings externally, away from the ministry, away from University Avenue, meeting people in Newmarket and Ottawa and London and Hamilton and Windsor, all around the province, to start to get these relationships going. So, let's see if this works. There we go. First priority, optimizing the pathways to the adoption, diffusion of innovation. I've talked a little bit of what this means. What have we done about it? Let me say that the number one barrier to the adoption and diffusion of new innovation in our healthcare system is risk aversion. This is what we've learned. It's fascinating. It's not, we don't need to pass new laws or change new laws or regulations, which is really good news. The maybe not so good news is all we're doing is driving behavioral change in Ontario's healthcare system. So, but look, it's risk aversion, and I'm not even talking about the political ownership, if you will, of the file. It's not that. It's literally in the system, in the bureaucracy, in the health service providers, up and down the ranks. It's not bad people, it's certainly not bad people doing bad things. It's not that. It's people doing the best they can, responding to the stimuli around them. So if you have no money, if a dollar wasted is a dollar gone, if you're not incented to find savings to allow you even just to reinvest them into the system, if you're worried that even the slightest misstep shows up on the front page of the Toronto Star, fairly or unfairly, right? On and on it goes. So getting at risk aversion is the biggest challenge for us and the biggest opportunity. So when we look at pathways, we look at different ways that we're going to get innovation into the system. One example of how we're doing this is Mars Excite. So you may know this program. The Excite value proposition is, if you have disruptive technology, we can help you get early input into the evidence that's going to be required to get you into the healthcare system. And so, Mars Excite has struggled. The value proposition is solid. It took 4.5 years to get the first product through, but we're going to work on that general process. I've inherited this now, so that's not going to happen anymore. So we're going to fix that process, but what's really exciting is the first product is about to come through, and it just shows you the nature of the kind of technologies that are available to us if we get this right. Breezo DX has a home diagnostic sleep apnea device, which is immensely powerful and potentially is a tool. Sleep apnea is a woefully underdiagnosed affliction, partly because for any of you who have parents or maybe yourself who has sleep problems, you go to a sleep lab that looks like a medieval torture situation in your, wherever the sleep clinic might be. So look, nobody really likes to do that. This is an innovative device that uses breath, sound, and movement measurement. It just puts on your face, you just sit on your face. It doesn't need technicians to attach it or monitor it or anything. So it's really cool technology. It's not even just personal, whatever, that makes it important. If you think of industries like truck driving, right, transportation, where staying awake is, and I'm not being facetious about this, I mean staying awake is a fundamental part of that job, obviously. So the opportunity that exists, if you can get a patient-centered, easy-to-use sleep apnea diagnostic device is significant. That is one of the things, getting that product into the system, overcoming the barriers to the adoption diffusion of a product like that, it's just one example, is one way that we're going to open up these pathways. We also, as I said, are hiring these innovation brokers. So think, in Ottawa you'll appreciate these comparisons, think of that awesome political constituency assistant. Think of the great community service person that works in the field. For those of you familiar with private equity, think of that super smart, usually young man or woman who knows everything there is to know about a very small subset of a particular industry in a particular geography. What do they have? It's not just a virtual Rolodex. It's insight. Who's doing what? Why? What worked? What didn't work? Who do they like? Not like? What's important to them? That's what our innovation brokers will be doing. You're going to recognize them when we hire the names. They're serious people. We're not making them decide to join the Ontario Public Service. We're saying you can reside outside the OPS, in the field, literally as well as figuratively, and therefore bring to us the insight that comes from those areas and be our eyes and ears into the particular geographies and be available to those people to help them directly and closely navigate the labyrinth that is the Ontario Ministry of Health. We're also developing a program that's going to go to cabinet soon, so I don't want to give too much away, but it's pretty amazing in the sense that it's going to be demand-driven, value-based innovation program. So it's leveraging the biggest asset of the Ontario healthcare system, namely Ontario's test bed. So how do you do that? Well, it's really important to be demand-driven. It's time for the system to identify its priorities. I don't mean overprescribing. I don't mean listing like every detail of every innovation that ivory tower people are looking for. On the other hand, there can't be a complete vacuum and just have innovators and entrepreneurs thinking that their idea might be welcome in the system. We have to find that sweet spot in the middle. So we want it to be demand-driven. We want to identify the priorities with sufficient precision but generality to give some clarity to innovators and entrepreneurs on how to make things happen. We're going to divide, we have this, I don't like the word program, but it's going to be an umbrella within which we'll have hospitals identify the priorities, ask for solutions, industry come forward with solutions, and they'll come together in an open, fair, and transparent, but efficient, timely and efficient procurement process. It'll be demand-driven, it'll be outcomes-based procurement, and it'll have components that aren't used widely now, like risk sharing and maybe even gain sharing. How's that for an idea? So those are the kinds of things that we're doing to ensure that we get at optimizing these pathways. It gets you quickly to the second priority, which is procurement. As I said, removing the province to a value-based procurement model, and that will be a drive, aside from being a more efficient, higher skilled procurement operation in the province of Ontario. It will also drive innovation, which is what good supply chain management, strategic supply chain management should do and does do in the rest of the world, and not just private enterprises. So we're going to do that. I got a gift because the supply chain management review process began shortly after I started. There's an expert panel that will present its advice to the ministers soon, and you will hear lots of ideas on how we can actually get the capabilities in our supply chain management up to the appropriate level, and the value-based procurement model. So at the same time, we're working with Ministry of Government and Consumer Services colleagues on how to make procurement more open to small and medium-sized enterprises. Again, it doesn't even have to be, pro-Ontario. It just has to make the system more open to smaller companies to participate. Not at the expense of the larger, the global multinationals. This is not a zero-sum game. It's growing the size of the innovation pie to the benefit of all. But in a system where procurement is really relationship-based, in other words, it's not evidence-based, so you've got to get people, sales reps in front of hospital CIOs or procurement agents or whatever, and together they kind of build the value-based, the RFP. That works for the bigger companies. They don't like it, but they can do it. Smaller companies can't do that. And increasingly, hospitals are bundling their offerings. So smaller companies don't even qualify. So that doesn't work either. And then if they do participate, it's 180 to 200 pages and 70 days to reply, and it takes 70 days to do so. So these are the kinds of things that we have to start doing differently. And probably most importantly, you can do an awful lot under the existing procurement rules in Ontario, and I bet across the country, that people are choosing not to do. And so we're going to educate boards, executive teams, procurement agents on how to do things like blow through the pilot phase, if you will. You don't have to do only a pilot. The best ideas will come from true collaboration with industry, and then taking the idea into the system, as opposed to collaborating with industry, getting to a great point, and then saying to the company involved, thanks for all that, now we're going to go to an RFP. Right? That's not going to work for industry. Instead, what we want to do is get to that place where, for example, if it's open, fair, and transparent, you can procure right through that. You can say, we're going to do a pilot, and if you hit the milestones, we're going to have procurement into the system. You can do that, as long as you're open, fair, and transparent about it. Better care closer to home. We've talked about, or I highlighted the Health Technologies Fund. So we said, in the context that we're going to try and drive the change in behavior that we're trying to see, this fund, not very much money, it's not a game changer in itself, it's only $5 million a year in a $52 billion system, but it gave us the opportunity to say, we're not going to just give money to companies. We're going to give monies to health innovation teams. So companies who have partnered with health service providers and researchers or investigators, if appropriate. You come forward with your idea, and we'll match funds. And despite all those bars and saying that it had to be focused on how your technology will help better deliver home and community care, we had 230 applications. And that was after weeding out the ones that were really just poking around. The last time a program like this was sent for call, they had 19 of them. 19 of them. So the fund was an opportunity to really get into home and community care and how technologies could help. It was a chance to get our ministry colleagues around the table to look at all these ideas. We had, I think, 12 of the 15 departments in health ministry talking about them, like looking at the technologies, looking at whether they actually were answering priorities for the ministry. And it was really, really, really great, frankly, as an exercise in collaboration and driving the behavioral change we like to see. So you will hear more about that as the decisions are made in the new year. But that's really powerful stuff. The fourth priority is digital health. So you saw Ed Clark's report looking at digital health assets and the value and the potential for them. I'd really commend that report to you. Remember, Ed Clark ran TD and took that through the merger with Canada Trust by his own admission from an entity that wasn't particularly customer focused. Remember those days of bank tellers, and well, some of you aren't even old enough, but bank tellers standing in line, on and on. Now, maybe the most customer-centric financial institution in the country. So having that lens on our, what used to be called e-health, we don't call it e-health anymore, digital health assets was really powerful. Our lens on this is not delivering e-health or that kind of connectivity, but how can you develop tools and collaborations within Ontario to make it happen? And the digital health strategy will be really, really useful for all of us as we look to advance that work. But there are great examples of how people are doing that already. There's a program coming out of UHN in collaboration with Mars and Mohawk College in Hamilton called Spark, which is something that we've helped fund. And the task is to really open up a safe digital environment where companies and patients can test new technologies to improve patient care. So there's more than 5 billion data points apparently in the EHR system in Ontario for our nearly 14 million patients, or Ontarians anyway. And it's very cumbersome for anyone to access that data. So the work of Spark is to figure out the way to allow these people to tap into that rich data environment and ultimately have the data and the system reach their true market potential, again, to improve health outcomes as well as achieve economic growth. So it's a pathway. It's not a product or a technology. It's something that will help accelerate the commercialization of digital health assets in Ontario. And it's really a way to guide innovators and startups to achieve their potential. And the last priority is Indigenous, helping improve the outcomes of our Indigenous folks. So the potential here is immense. If we can get to a place where we can, for example, remember Africa had no penetration of telephony, then mobile phones came along and they leapfrogged. So you went from no penetration in phones to penetration at the level of some of the Western European countries because they weren't burdened by pipes, the metaphorical pipes in the ground or wires overhead. So they were able to leapfrog. And I think if we went to a whiteboard and said, how would you deliver healthcare to our reserves now using new technologies? Wouldn't look anything like what we're doing now. So look, this is a sensitive area. You have to do it in the right way, but the potential for achieving outcomes is really, really exciting. So just before we wrap up, I want to highlight, and we can pick it up in the conversation later, where we're going with our work. So this is a slide we showed from the very beginning that talked about what themes were going to characterize the work that we do. And hopefully you've seen all of those come up in our discussion. I don't want to leave without saying this is led by patients, right? Not just because it's the right way to deliver healthcare, but also patients will drive the adoption of innovation. That cohort of baby boomers going up to the system have been satisfied with nothing along the way. They will drive change in the healthcare system. The other thing that's important is when we talk about adoption diffusion within Ontario's healthcare system, the big win is in part a product coming into the system being diffused throughout the 13 million patient system. A pretty close second is just using Ontario as the first customer or the reference customer to drive exports. If you're going to produce the next Medtronic or Baxter out of Ontario, it's going to be on the backs of exports. Ontario is a big company, a big market in Canada, relevant North Americally, that should be a word, within North America. It's not, it's small globally, very, very small. So but that's okay, right? Because we can leverage the asset we have, the Ontario healthcare system, that end user as the first customer or the reference customer to drive exports of these companies. So think of Trudel, think of Oculus, think of ThoughtWire, think of Think Research, think of all these companies in Ontario that are exporting as well as they are now, and think of how powerful they would be if there was an organized way that Ontario was their reference customer. In 2017 and beyond, I've talked about demand-driven, so I just want to leave that with you. Demand-driven. The system should be deciding where it will invest its money, of course, but it shouldn't be over-prescriptive. We need to find the sweet spot between those 2 points at the end, those two ends of the spectrum. But you know who the demand drivers are? You, patients, clinicians, everybody in Ontario. You're also the agents of change. And everything we can do to have that demand drive be the pull of innovation into the system, the better off we are. That's a fundamental tenet of our work going forward. In addition, I hope you've heard the call to action against risk aversion. Everything you can do to get people to think differently, to think outside the box about where solutions can come from, the better off we'll be. And there's just such amazing examples of companies that are responding to the challenges presented in their institutions. Josh Liu is a guy in Toronto with Seamless MD who has an e-discharge solution, which is a cloud-based platform for hospitals to educate, engage, and monitor patients through surgery. Your iPad, other platforms will give you the information, the education, the nudging to do everything you should be doing in advance and after your surgery. His outcomes, the improvement in outcomes, are tremendous. Clearwater has come out of CHEO here in Ontario, in Ottawa. Matthew Bromwich was really trying to help a young, you might have seen the newspaper article, a 15-year-old boy called Jacob who had a hearing issue. And so to get tested for hearing, he'd have to come into the hospital, the same thing. You got to go to the bricks and mortar, you got to go through a lab, and it's tortuous and everything. Well, not literally so, but it's uncomfortable, it's time-consuming. You should see what Dr. Bromwich has come up with. It's a shoebox. It's an auditory testing device that's the size of a shoebox. And you communicate using an audiometer that's an iPad that looks more like a video game than anything else. So suddenly, Jacob doesn't have to miss everything, his homework, whatever else he might be doing, to go in and get tested. He can do it at home, and it's communicated wirelessly back to the hospital, and that's how the engagement happens. That happens from a clinician inside the system who is responding to the demand of the system and has got the hospital to go past the notion of being averse to the risk of trying this stuff out. Openness. Everything I talk about can be characterized by openness. The more we have people working together, and I can give you chapter and verse on examples I've seen, again, it's not novel, on how to get people to working more closely together, especially in 2016. Think of the way that tech companies do business everywhere now. It's the way business is done. It should be the way healthcare business is done. And outcomes-based. So again, instead of saying, here's the widget we want or the process we want or whatever, let's identify the outcomes that we're looking for and then get out of the way and let industry come forward, not abdicating our responsibility. This is an incredibly important task. We're talking about delivering healthcare to people. So it's not getting out of the way entirely, but it's allowing them to come forward with the solutions and building upon that. That's the different way of doing. God, we can talk about data analytics forever. That could be another topic. But going forward, we will look more and more at the power, not just of interconnectivity and data being available, what you do with that data information. And then lastly, anything that looks across silos at the continuum of care for patients helps innovation. Again, increasingly, we need to have the people who are making the investment decision in innovation also being the ones who benefit from it at the back end. If you have a new surgical procedure that reduces readmissions, reduces infections, reduces bed time, all that stuff, the surgeons, the people running the emergency or the operating rooms, they don't benefit from that savings at the back end. But if you take it up to the hospital administrator, if you take it up to a LHIN, or a regional health network, looking at the full continuum of care, now you start to get the right investment decisions happening. So I will finish with this. I'm a pretty passionate person about this, as you can tell. I hope that comes across. Bet it does, as they're trying to get me off the stage. Look, I did this about 2 months in. I have a friend who's a professional. She's not a healthcare professional. And I was kind of, one of these moods, and I'm bright-eyed and, so optimistic, and here's what we're doing, and this is awesome, and I love the job. And she looks at me, she goes, wow, that sounds really great. Wow. So, as a patient, in 2 years, what's going to look different to me as a result of the work you're doing? And I just went, no. That's an awesome question. It's an awesome question. And in all the enthusiasm and my thinking that I've got the right perspective, look at me, I'm thinking about it in the big picture and all this great stuff I'm doing, and that's the question. So I told this story back to our team at the office, kind of like I did now, guess I'm not so smart after all. Perfect question. I came back the next day. This is a photo of what sits on our wall in the office. They printed it out and put it on the wall. It's not even like a shtick. They actually did it because it had the same impact on them that it did on us. How cool is that? And that's why we're doing it. I suspect that for many of you, that's why you get up in the morning and do what you do. It's certainly what they do in these great institutions in Ontario and across Canada. It's why I'm doing this. And it's just one of the many reasons I love this job. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Robson. I'm an assistant professor at Carleton University, where I teach courses in public policy and political management. I was invited to be here today because I also work with Canada 2020 on a podcast called Brief Remarks. So there's a new episode out today. Go to wherever you download your podcasts. Go get the new episode today. For those of you, I'm going to do the professor thing. For those of you who are hanging out in the back, feel free to come forward. There are a few empty spaces up at the front, so please feel free. No need to linger at the back of the room. Bill, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I want to cast back to 2013. As you noted in your remarks, your office was created on the basis of advice from an innovation council. Taking a look at the landscape, because of course in health and innovation things change very quickly, what in your view are some of the big changes that have taken place since 2013?
So more importantly than anything else, I think the conversation's happening. And I don't say that lazily. I think it's absolutely true. It's one of the, wherever I go, I am told that people are talking about things differently. And the energy and enthusiasm that comes from presentations I give still astounds me. At Canada 2020 last time, there were 19 people waiting to talk to me after the presentation. It has nothing to do with me. It's really just the energy and enthusiasm about this topic. So it's a bit like, what is it, the 10-step program? The first step is admitting you have a problem. And again, it's really important. So you can't get to solution until you actually identify what the challenge is, and then you quickly go to see the opportunity in that challenge. And there's lots of different examples of things that are being done differently that we can talk about, but I think more than anything else, that's the biggest change. Now, if that's the only thing I can give you, 2 years from now, we haven't done a very good job. But I think right now, that's a big, big difference.
I want to pick up on that really colorful bubble slide that you had, the bubble graph that you had, comparing the opportunity for innovation and efficiency changes in health systems compared to other, I think you referred to them as industrial sectors. Yeah. And I want to ask this question more from the patient perspective, which is the note that you ended off on. From a citizen end user perspective, adding value means help me be healthier, help my loved one who's maybe in health crisis. And that isn't necessarily the same as efficiency from the patient perspective. So how do you explain the value proposition to the patient perspective? And how do you explain to the patient that this is a sector that is comparable to opportunities for innovation in financial services or education or any of the other sectors you had up there?
So that's a great question, and it's a very, very important one. I still run into people, to be very honest, people who should know better, if you will, who say, I don't see the link between healthcare and economic development. So that's why I said at the beginning, and I finished with the patient, it comes together in healthcare at the patient, at the point of healthcare delivery. I think if we're in a situation where everything was perfect and lots of money was happening and someone stood in front of the room and said, we really should be changing this really great system we have because some person, some man or woman, has a bright-eyed idea that we're going to drive economic development, I think that would be a tough sell, to the point of your question. That's not where we're at. I mean, look, as strong as the healthcare system is, I think we all know that it is nowhere near what it could be. And again, yes, that's a subjective conclusion, but it's almost objective because when you look at the Commonwealth Fund's report on outcomes, for example, we're right near the bottom. And the only group below us is the US. And the only reason they're below us is because they're talking about averages, right? Healthcare is delivered better in pretty much every OECD country when you look across population health than it is in our Canadian jurisdictions. And it's not like we got a lot of money. So that says that if you're a patient who should have the expectation of higher healthcare delivery, better healthcare delivery, higher patient outcomes, you should be asking yourself, well, why not? And how do we get there? And the answer, in part, is you bring innovation in. And we're not making this stuff up. Like, these are ideas, technologies, processes that are adopted throughout the world. Even our own Ontario companies, as I said, are exporting these ideas and processes and technologies. So the link is, if you adopt innovation generally, and in particular, the innovations coming out of Ontario companies, from my Ontario perspective, you will get better patient outcomes. Like, it is a direct point at the end of two lines coming together. And it's kind of convenient. Like, I'm fortunate that it's that easy, if you will. But I really think it's true. And so, in effect, the economic development becomes an offshoot of improved patient outcomes and better value in the system, which is why we have those three objectives as part of our purpose statement.
I want to pick up on, excuse me, that theme of demand that you touched on in your remarks. How much of the current pressure that the system is already facing is actually from very high expectations from patients? And how do we, while the system is evolving and changing, and your office is trying to make some headway in terms of adoption of innovation within the system, but there is going to be that uncomfortable period before we find that new equilibrium where supply hits demand. So how do public health care systems manage that transition?
That's another very good question. So I think this is probably the most challenging part. And that's because, like any enterprise, you have to make decisions on where to invest your resources, time and energy as well as money. And there is an opportunity cost to those decisions. So you have to get it right. Now, depending on where you're at in your cycle, you don't have to be right all the time. And this comes back to the risk aversion point. But you've got to be right, generally, or you'd probably be out of a job. But you have to, the tension will be having systems in place and capabilities in place that have the insight about not only what's available out there, but how it can best be applied to the domestic system. So let me use an example of the Cleveland Clinic. If you talk to someone from the Cleveland Clinic, which for 22 years in a row has been the best cardiovascular hospital in the US and now is ranked the second best hospital in the US. If you talk to their supply chain management people, it is an incredible story. Their level of capabilities dwarfs what we have available in Canada. That you feel like you're talking to a different person, quality of professional than you are when you talk to people in Ontario. So I'm not slagging the people in Ontario. What I'm highlighting is what great can look like. So what do? First of all, their whole supply chain management process pairs up with clinicians. So it's clinician-led as much as anything. So what does that mean? Well, now that means you've got people, men and women who are actually delivering healthcare on the front lines, who know what the challenges are and know what the opportunities are involved in this supply chain management process. Then their environmental scan is amazing. They know, it feels like they know kind of any technology that's available anywhere in the world, and they have the insight because of the clinician-led function of how it will actually help delivering healthcare in their jurisdiction. Then
They have data and data analytical capabilities so they can quantify what the improved outcomes could be and how much money you would save. They have the commercial capability so they don't get themselves locked into 5 to 7 year contracts with large companies with no off-ramps. Even when innovation is growing, and we know how quickly these things change, innovation is growing outside of the purview of those contracts. Instead, they negotiate contracts that literally have off-ramps, exit ramps, if there is iterative innovation, material iterative innovation outside the contract that the provider can't match. Amazing, right? That's just commercial negotiation skills. Then it kind of finishes with the loop closes because of continuous technology assessment on what works and is not working inside the hospital itself. So that closes a loop. So if you put all those components together, you've got an amazing process by which you can decide where to invest your time, energy, and resources to get at that point. And you know what? It also is okay to be wrong sometimes. If you, as we all know, for investing in innovation, sometimes it's not going to work, but you still have to invest if you're going to achieve those improved patient outcomes and get better value in the system.
I think we have time for one final question. So I want to give you a bit of airtime to come back and talk about two of the initiatives that your office launched within the last year. You spoke briefly on them. This is the network of health innovation brokers across Ontario that are supporting early adoption and also the testing of health technologies. There's a fund for that. So I know you gave us kind of a broad overview of what would success look like for your office overall. Tell us, when will you declare victory? Like, what does success look like on those two initiatives more specifically?
Another good question. So the innovation brokers, there's a lot of excitement about these. I think I underestimated how different that was. I mean, to me, because of my political background, I mean, years ago, I was a senior staffer to Bill Graham and Alan Rock. I don't even know how many of you were around when Bill and Alan were in Ottawa. So senior cabinet ministers. And so I know that great constituency assistant in politics. I also, because of community work, know the strength of a community outreach, a community liaison person, and I know the private equity business. So all that together says to me, look, or sales reps in pharma, I mean, Phil and Joe here, but the point of having somebody who isn't in the office, right? They are field-based. They are in the field. To me, that kind of made sense when your function was going to be putting people together and starting to build collaboration with effect, getting deals done, as it were, for the betterment of patients and the system. So, but I underestimated how interesting and I guess novel this was. So many people in government are watching how successful this is. I think that the metrics will be as they will be for the office, namely, how many companies have we helped? How much money have we gotten into the system? How many of their products are into the system? Are they exporting more? It will, our patient, I don't know if we'll be able to measure added value, but we could probably start to get our head around patient outcomes because the programs that we're developing that the brokers will help on will be outcomes based, and so you'll be measuring the improvement in patient outcomes. So I think that's how we'll know whether the brokers are working, and we will also be looking for feedback constantly on whether they're doing what we think they could do. So the feedback of people out there will be very important on that front. On the Health Technologies Fund, I mean, I told you how it was structured. They'll probably have 2-year terms. Here's how I know we'll be successful in that fund. So let's say there's 10 companies that get grants out of that fund. Pilotitis is a phrase, again, I didn't know about until I took this job. We love to have pilots in Ontario, but pilots actually in the commercial world are something quite specific. It is, you're testing a proposition, right? And if you get over that hurdle, you're in. If you don't, you're out. That's not what these things are in healthcare. They're value demonstration projects, I guess. So when I was going around the horn when I started, I'd meet with entities that have funded these types of things, and they'd be so excited because of their cohort of, say, 6, 5 had hit the milestones. I'm like, I'm waiting for the next, and then? But the and then never came, because then they'd flip and they'd start talking about the second cohort, which is another 6 companies that they're going to give money to, and we'll see how that turns out. A success for the Health Technologies Fund will be, have we got great ideas? I know we will, because I've seen lots of them, or heard about lots of them. Are they meeting their milestones that they've set for themselves within the fund? Are they answering healthcare priorities? And I think we've answered that one already because that was one of the big criteria for choosing. But then we're not going to let it end at the end of those 2 years. We're going to follow those companies and we're going to, all else remaining equal, get them adopted and diffused within the system. So the test for me for that fund will not be, have we got the grants out in a timely way and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be what happens at the end. Like, to what end is one of my favorite questions. So we're giving all this money to these health innovation teams, to what end? Well, the end is, are they in the system to improve patient outcomes, add value to the system, and ultimately create jobs in Ontario?
Bill Charnetski, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.